Welcome to the Lean Out Your Business podcast, a show dedicated to helping entrepreneurs accelerate business growth and simplify success. I'm your host, Krista Grasso, and I've been working with businesses for more than 2 decades to help them lean out and optimize what's working while eliminating anything that's not adding value. So if you are ready to get more time back in your day, more profit in your business, and to do business differently, growing and scaling on your terms, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Lean Out Your Business podcast. Today, I am so excited to be welcoming Jen Coken back onto the podcast again. It's been a while. Jen, I'm so excited that you're here. And we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. We're going to be talking about shattering the ceiling, especially doing so in a way where you're not breaking yourself in the process. And if you do not know Jen, you need to know Jen, and you will after today's episode. But she is an internationally acclaimed imposter syndrome expert, a coach, a speaker, a comedian. She empowers women executives in male-dominated industries to lead with more authority, influence, and impact, and to be the type of leader that people respect and recognize. Jen, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I was trying to figure out when I was on, but it seems like a couple years ago. Am I right about that?
I
I
think
feel
we
like
might have been in double-digit podcast episodes instead of triple, so it's been a while.
yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while, but I'm happy to be here and happy to always to talk to you because you're brilliant.
As are you. And so Jen and I go way back. We've known each other forever and ever and ever now. I have talked a little bit on the podcast about the keynote that I did back in October with Kim Woods. And Jen just so happened to be giving her own keynote on the stage right before me. And the combination of the two of us back to back was pretty awesome for most of the people in the audience from everything that I've heard.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And given, one of my expertise is imposter syndrome, I thought you were going to go into and Jen experienced imposter syndrome on stage in front of 200 of her peers. Woohoo! Which is true. That part is true. But we worked it out.
We did. And that's one of the things I love so much about your work and why I was so excited to have you back on the show is we all have imposter syndrome moments. And I love the way that you shift the positioning around that. So before we dive into some of the shattering of the ceiling and all of the juicy stuff we're going to talk about today, can you share a little bit about your unique perspective on imposter syndrome?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always fight against using those words of imposter syndrome, but it has really freaking high SEO, and that's why we use it. But truly, it's not a syndrome because it's not a medical diagnosis. It is a phenomenon. So when the two women researchers who named it back in the 70s, they called it imposter phenomenon because it was phenomenological and as lived experience. So whenever we question and doubt ourselves, there is an experience of like sweaty armpits or heart palpitations or pressure in our throat. We start having those body sensations and those are real. But my take on imposter phenomenon or feeling like an imposter is that it is simply an amygdala hijack. And it's not something that's bad, which many people are Googling. There's like 3.3 million tips on how to overcome imposter syndrome. Spoiler alert, you can't unless you're dead. Okay. Because you have a brain and the brain has a negativity bias and the brain is determining threat. And so if you're an entrepreneur reaching for that next goal, going, okay, I've been doing $250,000 a couple of years in a row. This year I'm going to $500,000. This year I'm going to launch a new product. I'm going to speak 20 times. Oh, I'm talking to myself. Okay. All those things that in that moment, you're going to have doubts and fears and wonder, will it work out? Because the brain's job is to keep the thing it's a brain of alive. Its job is to discern the level of threat. Only the brain's never dealing with reality. That in and of itself, neuroscience tells us the brain's only ever dealing with interpretation. So when it's determining threat level, it's comparing it to everything else in your noggin to figure out how bad it's going to be and what you could do if you failed and how to pick yourself back up and that sort of thing. So what I tell my clients is, and everybody else, if you don't have imposter phenomenon, if you don't feel like an imposter at some point in your life, you're not playing big enough because it's going to naturally occur. Now, the key too is understanding the pattern of when it occurs. For me, it always comes up when I'm about to speak to peers. I could walk into, which is why that happened when we were speaking together. I can walk into a stadium of 10,000 people and I will not bat an eyelash. You put me on stage in front of my peers, you put me about to lead a webinar for 20 of my peers, and I am freaked out always till Sunday because what I distinguished is that my flavor of imposter syndrome, of feeling like an imposter, happened when I was a little kid and embarrassed myself in front of my peers. Other people, it happens in their relationship to authority. Other people, it happens when they don't want to be like somebody else. And my unique perspective is it is actually your superpower. Because when something happens that you have those bad emotion, bad air quotes on air, whether you're listening or if you're not watching, I'm air quoting, bad experience or bad feeling or, yeah, bad emotion, the brain's going to go, whoa, let me figure out how not to have that happen again. And therefore it comes up with a strategy to succeed. So when that happened to me when I was 6, I decided, never going to put myself out there, going to get everybody else out front. And I spent a career of pushing other people front, having them succeed. And by the way, being funny. So my particular bent is it's a brain pattern. It is not to be avoided. You don't have to worry about having it. In fact, it is a marker to tell you you're going for it and you're playing big. The key is to have the self-awareness and the ability to witness the phenomenon as it's unfolding in the moment and go, wait a minute. Okay, I'm feeling like an imposter right now. This happened to me right before Christmas. I was giving a talk, and all day long it was a talk to my peers. It was like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, what's going to happen? And then I just said to myself, you know what? I'm someone who wants to make a difference, and I'm committed to having everybody in that room, no matter who they are, get something out of this. And that commitment becomes bigger than the crap between my ears, which, by the way, is a great segue into shattering the glass ceiling without burning yourself out, because many times that glass ceiling is in our head.
Yeah, I can imagine anytime you are going big in your career, in your business, in any area of your life, and you are hitting that ceiling, sometimes it might be external circumstances, but I imagine more often than not, it is internally driven as well. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we can't discount the external circumstances. We honestly can't discount the patriarchal society that we have grown up in, that we are operating our businesses in, that we are leading in our companies. The sexism, homophobia, racism, I'll say it this way, the unconscious bias, because I don't think anybody, quite frankly, this day and age, is trying to be intentional to keep people down, but there is a lot of unconscious bias that people get impacted by. And, I sometimes worry about saying it's internal, even though I do believe that, because I don't want to take away the responsibility of companies to create cultures and business owners to create cultures of their own companies that are inclusive, where people feel appreciated and known. So, what I've been seeing lately though is there is this trend where more women are getting to the C-suite, let's say, there's more women-owned businesses, but many times the training that would have companies, let's say, get find people internally to promote, they don't have those pipelines in place, so people aren't getting trained. And so there's this interesting nuance or balance between, yes, we got to start with ourselves. What's that internal glass ceiling? Where am I limiting myself? How do I shatter my internal glass ceiling so I can have the power to identify and recognize the actual unconscious bias or systems? If you're an entrepreneur in a male saturated industry, there's still systems there that you've got to fight against in a lot of ways to be heard. But if we don't have that internal confidence, we're going to take things personally. We're going to think it's us rather than going, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with me. This is an external phenomenon. And let me figure out how to get around it, get through it, get underneath it, or break that freaking wall down.
Yeah, I love that perspective, and it is true. I think it very much is both, and as someone who very early on, if we rewind back to the good old year of 2000, um, and
What?
I know. Let's go way back in our time machine
Yeah.
here. But this was when I was entering the corporate space, and I had come in as a consultant and really was doing the job of a project manager.
Mm.
And I was told once I finished this project, I could basically have whatever position I wanted because it was going really well. And I said, "Great, I want to be a project manager." And they just kind of looked at me funny and laughed, like, "Oh, isn't that cute?" Because at the time, you were not a project manager if you were a 20 something year old woman. Like both of those things together were it was comical to them. And I fought and I fought and I fought and I finally gave them one of those negotiation tactics that they kind of can't say no to, which is, well, what can it hurt to just give it a try? And if I don't do well, then I'll go do this other thing that you want me to do. And so they reluctantly said yes, expecting me to fail, and I became the client's top consultant. And I ended up getting promoted from project manager to program manager to senior PMO to senior program manager to PMO manager. And I was the youngest and only woman to do that. But I fought so hard for that. And today, that's not the case nearly as much, which is nice to see some of those evolutions.
Yes. Well, the thing I love about that, Krista, is that you navigated the gender bias in your own way in a way that was true for you, right? You said, well, wait a minute, which is you're so collaborative. That's, I know you as someone who's like, wait a minute, let's look at this. What about this? What about that? It can't hurt. Too often I have heard stories about women that have coaches that are other women that one in particular who revealed to me that she was told not to stand when men entered the room because her father was a businessman and she was always told to stand and shake hands. Don't do that. Laugh more. Don't speak up as much. And doing all those things completely went against who she was and she burned out from it. But boy, did she get promoted up. This isn't corporate, up the corporate ladder until she couldn't stand herself anymore. And I think that's really important when we're looking for, okay, what's the secret? Whether you're talking about executive presence, and that can be for an entrepreneur or an executive in a company, whether we're talking about gender bias, what's the secret? Be yourself. That honestly is a secret. But then you got to figure out, well, who am I? Yes, that's a great conversation to be in with yourself. Who am I really? What do I believe in? What's true for me? What are my values? And this is, again, I'll go back to this. If we don't have that confidence, like that taproot in who we are, we get sucked into toxic cultures. We take things personally, and we don't have the power to fight the system, man.
I have consulted in corporate for so many decades now. I feel like I've seen so much of and experienced so
All
much
of
of
it.
what you talk about. So, how can women really navigate this, right? How can they deal with the workplace biases? How do they even recognize that they exist? Because I wouldn't have been able to tell you back in the day that they existed. I just knew what I was up against and was naturally fighting it. I wasn't thinking of a lot of the things that we now have language around and conversation around. So how do women be successful in this?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is we now have language around these biases. We now have ways and workshops and employee resource groups and other things to take advantage of, as well as other women, hopefully, to mentor us. Again, it's an internal game first and foremost. Figure out who you are, be confident about who you are, and also when you're experiencing failure or doubt or that experience of imposter phenomenon, when you're questioning or doubting yourself, when you're finding yourself wanting to work so hard because you got to prove yourself in some way, shape, or form, or you are trying to get it all right before you put the project forward and it's not okay to fail, all those like constraints, those straitjackets. Number one, figure out what the source of that is. And what I mean by that is, whose voice does it sound like? And I use a really easy technique with my clients when I'm coaching people one on one to ask them, who's that conversation remind you of? You feel like there's a lot of energy or negativity around that. What does that remind you of? What's an earlier similar experience? Earlier similar experience? Earlier similar? Really good questions to ask yourself to see if you can get back to the root. So that's number one. I think number two, when you're experiencing those biases or you think there's bias or some way It may not, like you said, oh, that's bias or that's unconscious bias, right? It could be something's off. I don't feel like I can speak up in that meeting. When I go to this meeting with this group of people, it just trust your body. It feels off or it feels weird or it gives you some kind of feeling in some kind of way. What I always tell people to do is write out what the experience is, what the feeling is, what was happening, write the whole thing out. Be like a detective trying to find the murder suspect. Who's to blame? All the things. Then go back and just circle the facts. Because when you're able to separate fact from fiction, your logical mind comes into play and your amygdala and that hijack reduces. So you can kind of test things like, when I go into these meetings, Jimmy John, I'll just call him John because there's more men named John, white men named John in the C suite than there are women, period. So let's just call him John. And man, whenever I'm in a meeting with that guy, this is how it feels. Okay, good. So then you can witness the situation if you're not caught up in it emotionally. And I teach women very specific things to say. So if you walk, I don't know if this ever happened to you in your corporate career, you walk in and they're like, "Oh, great, Krista, will you take notes?" That's happened to some of my clients. And what I say to them is, here's how you respond. Oh, I'd love to, but I find I'm more able to provide strategic direction when I'm really present. So maybe we can ask someone else to do it. There's just ways, or we can use humor or ways to kind of maneuver it. Somebody steals your idea. Thank you, John, for saying that. That's exactly what I was saying earlier. And here's why I think that's important. The key is not to let it catch you off guard or what's the word, that you don't shrink down in those moments. You don't make yourself smaller.
Yeah, that's such good advice because I can remember times when I wouldn't say anything and I would walk out of the meeting livid, like livid. And I'd be telling everybody and their brother, I can't believe it. And do you know where and then later on I realized I'm allowing that to happen. I
Yeah.
need to be the one that speaks up in the meeting, but it was very self-learned back then. I did not have someone like you to guide me.
Well, I think too, Chris, I mean, I think it's getting a coach, and I'm glad that you recognized, again, it's this nuance between I'm putting the straight jacket on versus what's the culture that I'm in. Because it could be when you're running your own business, right? There's this entrepreneurial straight jackets that we think we have to do things a particular way or I don't know. We were talking, I think you did your I don't know when it's coming out. Maybe I'm doing a spoiler alert where one of your tips was like 2020, next year, right, has to be more relational than transactional. So, having those guideposts for ourselves to be able to discern that. And in the moment, yes, you're the one who's editing yourself. And so it starts with you, right? But then if other people are editing you, yeah, just I wasn't finished talking. Or my favorite one is just silence. Somebody starts talking over you and you just stop and look at them like they have three heads until they stop talking. But I'm bold like that. I'll do those kinds of things.
And this is why we love Jen Coken. So, how about you just gave some fantastic examples which I loved, but if someone is feeling invisible or
Yeah.
feeling undervalued, are there any tips or strategies that you have for them?
Yeah, one of the things people don't well, two I'll give you two statistics. 92% or 93% of what people perceive about us is nothing we say. So it is body posture, it is the way you hold yourself, it is how you're dressed. Now, less now because different, when back in my day, okay, I had to wear hose, skirts over my knee, jackets all the time, and closed-toed shoes. Couldn't take your jacket off at work. I don't care how hot it was in the summer in Cleveland, Ohio, man, you could not take off your jacket at work. So it is part of it is just the visual representation, how you're holding yourself. The second piece is 70% of how you're perceived is executive presence, not what you do. So, number one, figure out your own value system. What's important to you? Um, integrity. And by that, I mean doing things as they were meant to be done, not cutting corners, having things work for everybody. Is that important to you? Make sure that you're adhering to that. But if you're specifically feeling invisible at work, this may be the time where you say to yourself, you know what? This is the year where I'm going to speak up. This is the year where I'm going to do the hard thing. This is the year when I'm going to, like you did, ask for that next job and say, um, try it, try me. Let's see how I do. And we'll go from there. This is where you take a chance on yourself because we cannot wait for doors to open for us. If you look at anybody who's made it, we have kicked doors down. We have not, and it may look like doors were open. People go, they're an overnight sensation. No, they're not. No, they're not. Nobody is. None of us are. I'm going 10 years into my business and I am where I am today for all the doors I kicked through, all my own doors I kicked open in my relationship to myself. So it starts with you. Ask for more opportunities to lead if you're feeling invisible, if you're not feeling valued. If you're not feeling valued, start doing an assessment of yourself, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and start asking for, I'm telling you, when I'm coaching people, so few one-on-one weekly meetings with their direct reports. They only do a performance review once a year because it's what's expected of them. Ask for more. Ask for weekly or every other week 20-minute meetings with your manager. 20-minute meetings with, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, you should have your own board of advisors that you meet with monthly to get feedback. How am I doing? How's it going? I mean, you know me. I'm like, okay, does this make sense? Should I switch it here? I'm always asking, sometimes too much. I should say that. Don't err on the side of asking other people's opinions too much. But I think if you're feeling undervalued, figure out a way to be valued by asking for what you need and going for it. And if you're feeling invisible, figure out first where those internal invisibility cloak, where you're wearing that, take it off and look for opportunities to shine more and put yourself out there more. Does that make sense?
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's just so much truth in that. And I've found, even for myself, sometimes I've made a decision in my business or in my career, and someone will come to me after and say, I really would have loved that opportunity. And they'll say it afterwards. And I appreciate that they told me. But the reality is, I'll kick myself and say, I would have so much rather given it to them. But they didn't say anything. And so I wasn't even thinking of them. It wasn't that I was overlooking them intentionally, it was that someone else was asking. So I was developing that person for it. And had that person asked or spoken up, I would have considered them for it in a different way. So sometimes I think we think that things are about us when they're not. It's not that someone didn't choose you, it's
Yeah.
that they might have chosen someone else because someone else was asking. So I learned to always ask.
What is the thing about the something something you don't eat? Like if you don't ask, you don't eat. Like the whatever that phrase is. But the other thing that reminds me of is that you know, any time you want something in life, you must ask for it. You must ask to be on that podcast. You must ask for that endorsement for your book. You must go out. When I'm coaching some of my clients, they say to me, "Well, I just figured my manager would see that change in me." Don't assume. We're so caught up in ourselves. We're so narcissistic. I mean, not like a diagnosis or anything, but we got our own stuff going on. The world's revolving around us, right? So you need to like break through and say, I want that promotion. I want to work on that project. This is where I'm seeing where I'm changing. This is where I'm seeing I'm succeeding more. Do you agree? Are you seeing the same? You asked me to ship this last year. Or I said to myself, if you're working with a business owner and you're coaching them because you're a brilliant coach and they say, well, this is what I said I wanted to do last year. Do you see that? Well, yes and no. And here's where I think we can get better. So I think what you said is so important and brilliant because you got to ask, you got to make those opportunities.
Definitely. And I want to circle back to kind of the theme of this episode because I think it's so important in everything that you're talking about with breaking through those ceilings. But how do you do it without breaking yourself, without burning out, and without losing kind of who you are?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the very beginning too of where we started the episode. If you have to start with the internal game. You have to understand your own boundaries. Sit down and you do this with your clients. I forgot what you call it, but mine's like, what's your ideal day? I do that with my clients all the time. What do you call it when you're working with people? You call it
The time pie.
the time pie. Well, no, no, but there's like a
Oh, my
something
rich, fulfilled life?
rich, fulfilled life. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's it. Brilliant. If you haven't bought that from her, whatever you do to get that from Krista, get it. But I say to people, what's your ideal day? Well, ideally, I'd like to get up and spend this time. I like to eat breakfast, have some time to meditate, and spend this time with my kiddo before they get off to school. And then I'd like this amount of time, an hour to look through email before I meet with clients. I was meeting with an agency owner, big ad agency working for some major, Fortune 10 companies. And I was like, well, why don't you do that? Because the client wants to meet at 9. I go, so let them know, this is when you're available, 10 to 12 or 9:30, or figure out if you want half an hour in the morning, because what's happening is this owner is not present in those meetings. She's as present as she can be, but 1% of her brain is answering the emails, and 1% of her brain is doing that thing that she wished she had done before, but she can't get up any earlier because there's just not enough time in the day, right? There's only 24 hours in a day, and hopefully we get 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Um, so I think number one is understanding, what does your ideal day look like? It took breast cancer, as you know, for me to kind of figure out how to stop working all the time and feeling like I had to work all the time. And it wasn't even to prove myself, it was just this mountain of things to do and handle. And so I switched everything around, and I now close down at 6 o'clock. 5 o'clock's my last call. I finish up my day, 5:30, 6 o'clock, shut things down, make dinner, that kind of thing. So number one is you got to understand your own day or boundaries. And I think that too shows your team that they can have those kinds of boundaries as well. You have got to eat first. It's that age old, put your mask on before helping others. Because if you're burnt out, you're no good to anybody. So start with your ideal day. Also, start with, what are the things that feed your soul? What are the things you want to do once a week, once a month, once a year? I had somebody who said, I want to take a week vacation every month. I was like, great, but how do I do that? I was like, I don't know. Let's figure it out. But if that's what's going to feed your soul, or you want date nights with your partner, right? That's what's going to feed your soul. But you got to start figuring out the rules for yourself, because unfortunately, in this country, in the United States, hard work and work all the time is the norm. This is why I love European countries. In Spain, siesta 2 to 4, everything shuts down, right? They also eat dinner at 9 o'clock at night. I'm in bed, so I couldn't do that. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's what I would say is start with you. Start with you, figure out your boundaries, and then adhere to them.
Yeah, that little tiny actually adhere to the things that you say you want.
Yeah,
I
that
love it.
that that's a dance, right? That's an ongoing dance, because some weeks are going to be better than others, and you can't have everything. I always joke and say, because you don't have a place to put everything, so you don't want everything. But more than that, it is a dance. You kind of give yourself some grace and space if you want to be, for me, my perfect day is exercising, um, meditation, journaling. The meditation and journaling have dropped out over the last month or so because I joined a gym, and I've been going to the gym, and I haven't been getting up early enough to do that part. And I'm not going to beat myself up. This week's a new week. Every day is a new day. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So I think that then adhere to it before that is, don't make yourself wrong if you don't. And every day is a new opportunity to do that.
Brilliant. So tell people more about you and where they can find you and what you've got going on. What are you
Yeah,
excited about that's coming up?
I know. I've got very, very exciting things coming up. So my book will be out. Well, you can purchase it now. Go to jencokenbook.com. That's called Make Imposter Syndrome Your Superpower: The Ultimate Guide for Women in STEM to Lead with More Authority, Influence, and Impact. So that is going to make its public debut in a couple of months. But if you go to jencokenbook.com, you can figure out where to buy it. I have been running an amazing program. A new cohort is starting, and this is called the Executive Presence Accelerator. Very, very excited about. It was work I was doing with some companies, and decided to distill that work I was doing over the course of a year into 12 modules to really work with people on some of the core concepts of finding that internal confidence amplifying their voice when they feel like they don't have authority, how to weave storytelling into their presentations, dealing with gender bias, dealing with power dynamics. And that's for both entrepreneurs and executives. So the next cohort starts with that. That's the executive presence accelerator. So that's really exciting. And a bunch of speaking gigs coming up this year, and also doing some work with continuing to do some work with some of my clients with companies around the country. So, and people can find me. You might have asked me that. JenCoken.com, www.jencoken.com, JenCoken.com.
I love it. And for all of you listening, certainly everything Jen talks about, I feel like applies to us as entrepreneurs. But if you do know anyone in corporate, especially women in STEM, they absolutely need Jen's book. And generally, they just need Jen in their life, is what it comes down to. Um, but Jen, this question, I can't wait to hear what you have to say now. And I'll have to go back and listen to your answer from the last time you were on to see how it's evolved.
This won't be my answer from last time. I can promise you without a shadow of a doubt.
In your business, how do you work smarter, not harder, and keep things lean?
Chat GPT, baby. For reals. Like this is, I have learned so much. And I would think I was sharing this with you recently, as I have had a contract with a client for a couple of years, and we were coming to our final day of training, and I'm like, okay, like how do I synthesize everything we've done, all the notes, the monthly meetings, the quarterlies, all that stuff, and I've got a day. And it really wasn't even a day. It was like 8:30 to whatever noon. We broke for lunch for an hour, and then 1 to 4:30. So that's like 6 hours. How do you take 2 years into 6 hours and make sure they were launched into success? And so I took all the notes, everything I had done, all of it, created PDFs out of all of it, and created my own GPT, and gave it instructions to read through it, summarize it, and tell me how to review it in a day. And give me 5 possible additional workshops we could do. And so it gave me the whole format, the 5 additional workshops, talked to the client. They liked 2 of them. That's what we did. Then I took all my notes I wrote up, made it a PDF, went back and said, okay, now summarize all these notes. I mean, it was a lot of notes, Krista. It was, it's what are the big pieces of paper called?
The
They're
legals?
the what?
The legal
No,
pages?
like the easel, right? Easel pad, right?
Oh, the whiteboard,
The
like the flip
whiteboard.
chart
So
papers?
we had easels because we didn't have whiteboards in the hotel room, and sticky notes, big sticky
Nice.
notes. So I was trying to fold up all those pages and bring it back with me. It was too much. So I had a notebook, and I took all the sticky notes, and the notebook was like 3 inches thick. And then I had to go back and like transcribe all of it and figure out a way to put it together for recommendations. It was incredible. I mean, simple things like I use the tech advisor on GPT. If I'm having a tech issue, how do I do this? How do I do a zap for that? And it gives me an answer in 2 seconds, and I don't have to be searching. That I know I didn't say that. I know I didn't say that last time.
No, you most definitely did not, and you are pretty brilliant with ChatGPT. I love it.
It's really made a difference. Really made a difference. It doesn't
Fantastic.
replace me, and it doesn't replace anybody on the team, but it's made a difference. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's a great one. All right, so final question, even though I feel like we could talk all day long, and that is any final tips for anyone, whether they are an entrepreneur, whether they are in corporate, and they're trying to break through that ceiling, but do not want to break themselves in the process.
Yeah, I would say number 1, especially, at the end of every day, maybe start looking at, were there any limits I put on myself today? Right? We want to again start with that internal game. There is what do you call it? A Kohan, a story, we'll say it this way, about the way they train circus fleas is they put circus fleas in a jar, and they put the lid on the jar, and the fleas only jump as high as the lid. When they take the lid off the jar, the fleas jump just as high as the lid used to be. And that's human beings. We have these limits that we don't see, that we limit ourselves with. So I would check in with myself every day. Was there any place here that I felt limited? Okay, was that me? Was that something else? Did I not get the ability to meet with somebody that I wanted to pitch, give a proposal to, and that's how I felt limited? Okay, well, let's look at that process. So I think it's always starts with the internal game and then the external game. Check in daily. And then number 2, it's really important to understand your own boundaries and understand how you want to live your life on your terms, so that you can make sure you don't burn out. And I think that would be a good end of the day question too, which is, did I push myself too hard today? And I think we know as entrepreneurs when we're pushing ourselves too hard and when we need a break. And often we've broken ourselves and then we give ourselves the break. We have to learn as entrepreneurs not to reach that breaking point and to take a step back and to breathe, I think.
Absolutely. All right, Jen, thank you so much for being back on the show and sharing all your brilliance. Everyone, you'll find the links to all of Jen's magic down below. I hope you got as much out of this episode as I did. If you loved it, please do share it with someone else who will get a ton of value out of it as well. And I will see you again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. If you have not yet taken our scalability assessment, I invite you to head to leanoutmethod.com/assessment and take our interactive assessment that's going to help you look at how simple, how sustainable, and how scalable your business currently is. It includes personalized recommendations of where to focus next to get your time back, to increase your impact, increase your profits, and ultimately step into your rich, fulfilled life. And finally, we'd love to see you inside our signature program, Simplify to Scale. You can head to leanoutmethod.com/ops to find all of the details on how we can help you uplevel your operations and get out of the day-to-day of your business.